Mom, are you alive? But how is it? I saw you in the coffin. There was a funeral and we buried you in the cemetery. Who did I bring flowers to every week then? Don't lie. You never came to see me. And no one brings flowers, no matter how much good I did for you. I have never seen you so happy as at my funeral. You scoundrel. You think you took everything from me. I staged my death. To see who you really are. My name is Cynthia Ruben. I am 68 years old. And the last thing I remember is my car speeding away and the brakes not working. I am flying out of the lane. The car rolls over twice and a young rescuer, who arrived at the scene of the accident before anyone else, helps me get out of the car and disappear until the cops arrive. I planned everything well, circling all my relatives around my finger, especially the wasp. They thought they had buried me until I returned to them from the other world. If you watch this video, be sure to subscribe to my channel and write where you are watching us from. You're still here? Good. Then you deserve the truth. And I deserve to tell it, clean, sharp, without frosting. I will not be the woman you remember from the eulogies curated by people who could not even pronounce the names of my favorite authors. I will be the woman who learned, too late and just in time, that love without boundaries births wolves. 2 months before the funeral that wasn't, I woke to a hush that had a smell. Old houses talk at night, wood settles, refrigerators cough, wind drags a fingernail along the gutters. This was none of those. It was a sweetness, chemical and sour, coming from the garage like a lie-wearing perfume. I took my robe, my courage, and the small flashlight Daniel had gifted me, for the stairwell, he'd said, but we both knew it was for the shadows I never named. The garage light blinked on. Boxes where they should be, tools hung like obedient soldiers. The Corvette cover lay smooth. Nothing wrong. Nothing missing. Nothing, and yet. The floor told on someone, the faintest crescent smear near the front left tire, not oil, not water, a darker, thinner shine that drank the light. I crouched, touched it with the edge of an old envelope. It spread like a rumor. The cameras? Blind. 3 tiny red dots asleep in their sockets. I checked the feeds in the kitchen and saw a string of blank, pale hours. The system wasn't broken, it had been sidestepped. Someone who knew the angles had threaded themselves through the gaps. Someone who knew my house like a pocket. Someone who knew where I hid the good pearls and how I liked my coffee and how, when grief took me, I drove fast and thought faster. Only my son knows how much I love speed. Only Owen grew up with his palms on the garage fenders, reading the ridges, listening to the engines like they were hymns. But why would he deprive me of the opportunity to brake? I didn't drive the next day. I called Monroe and Daughters, my mechanic, since Monroe had only daughters and my first husband was still alive. "We'll send Eddie," the receptionist said, and sent me instead the first piece of proof that my gut was still a better detective than any man with a badge. Eddie slid under the car and came out twice as old. "Ms. Ruben," he said softly, "I'm going to show you something, and you're not going to like it." The brake hose wore a smile where it should have worn a seal. Clean cut. No fray, no nick like from road trash. A decision had been made under my car. He didn't charge me. He refused tea. He left with his eyes on the porch camera he knew was fake and touched his cap like a character from A Better America. I stared at the severed grin of the hose and felt a cold that was not fear. It was arithmetic. It was tallying birthdays and betrayals and the one signature that could move all the numbers from one column to another. That afternoon, my lawyer called. Terence Lyle had the voice of a cello, warm, grave, persuasive. "Cynthia," he said, "I'm looking at an authorization request that puts a lot of your money on a conveyor belt to nowhere. It's a rush transfer, very elegant forgery. The authorization came from your personal email." Except that it didn't. The words folded inside me like origami cranes, beautiful and useless. I thanked him with the politeness I keep for waiters and doctors and men who underestimate me. We locked everything down. He installed new alerts, passwords long as poems, fraud tripwires. I brewed coffee strong enough to fight God. A week later he called again, this time with the exact tone he used when my second husband tried to deed me the cottage he shared with his ex-wife. "Miss Cynthia," he said, he uses that Ms. like a shield when the news is bad, "I received your email about revising the will. You asked to remove certain charitable allocations and increase the bequest to your son. Do you still want to proceed?" I wrote no such email, I said, and I heard my voice from far away, like it had gotten lost in our house and was calling to me from the other room. I stopped sleeping. Grief is a tonic that wakes every old ache. Suspicion is a caffeine that makes God blink. I started to watch Owen the way you study a painting you've seen your whole life, suddenly certain there's a hidden face no one told you about. A new suit jacket here, a vanished watch there. Late night calls on the deck with the ocean turned up to drown the words. He runs a logistics company he inherited from his father, which is to say he inherited trucks and routes and a dependable shade of blue that says "trust me" to strangers on the highway. Money in his accounts? Yes. Many zeros. But solvency is a mask you can rent. I hired what I could trust, a woman who had never lost me. Her name is Petra. She is a private detective who collects alibis like stamps and debt like enemies. Petra smiled without her eyes and asked for the two things that solve most puzzles, time and receipts. She found both. The company was a shell with excellent stationery. Contracts floating like pretty kites, tethered to nothing. Fuel invoices unpaid. Casino markers tucked like wicks into the ledgers. Owen's name in the right places, someone else's fingerprints on the cards. He'd lost money that wasn't his yet. The most expensive thing anyone ever buys is an hour that's already gone. Then the medical angle. The kindly suggestions. "Mom, you forgot your keys again," with keys he'd moved. "Mom, you told me that story yesterday, about a story I'd never told." He made Alzheimer's with his hands the way a boy makes paper hats, quickly, carelessly, expecting applause. He took me to a doctor who offered me 3 words to remember: apple, penny, table, and later asked for them back like a debt collector. I gave him a 4th, attorney. The path forked, and I took the one that required a map I would draw as I went. If I confronted Owen, he'd deny and bury and charm. If I waited, I might be buried in a more literal sense. To survive the monster, sometimes you must become the ghost. I told Daniel first. Daniel is my partner in the way women my age prefer. He has his own house, his own blender, his own grandchildren, and the good sense to be tender and stubborn in equal measure. He listened without interrupting, then reached for my hand and said, "If the dead can teach the living, let's build you a classroom." We brought in his grandson, Eli, a paramedic with hands that have learned to tell the difference between panic and urgency, between pain and theater. Eli knew corners. Eli knew the choreography of catastrophe. Eli knew how to make a disappearance look like paperwork. Terrence, my lawyer, drew up a shadow wall that would sit beneath the first like a second spine. Petra arranged a rental cabin 3 towns over, paid with the kind of cash that makes no sound. I learned to breathe quiet as a cat. I learned that even in hiding, I was not alone. I had the old version of myself for company, and she was not kind. She wanted to ring her son's doorbell and throw him into the yard. She wanted to list his childhood virtues and ask them where they'd gone. She wanted to be wrong. We waited for the next move because a trap requires a second step. It came on a Thursday soaked with sun, a day that smelled like laundry and sea salt. Owen brought me tulips, yellow like caution tape. He kissed my cheek and called me kiddo, the way his father used to when he wanted me to sign something fast. He suggested a drive in the countryside, my favorite loop along the ridgeline, the one with the lookouts and the sudden curves that lift your stomach into your throat. I smiled and said I'd meet him there in my car. I did not tell him that Eddie had already replaced the sliced hose and left a second, identical line in a bag labeled prop. I did not tell him that Eli would be waiting 3 miles past the overlook, in a turnout within sprinting distance but out of sight. I did not tell him that there are accidents that save lives. We timed it like a heist. Owen left first. I counted slowly to 100 by sevens, the way a therapist once taught me to lasso my galloping mind. I drove the Corvette like it belonged to the woman in my will, the one who made careful fun of speed limits and wore lipstick to the bank. The sun made a net of the windshield. The radio hummed a song from the year I first left home, when I believed men in ties were promises. At mile marker 14, the road cups around a boulder the size of a small resignation. I pressed the brake and the pedal sank like a prayer into water. I let the wheel go loose and did the only arithmetic that mattered. Speed plus angle equals spectacle. I took us into the ditch like a swan. The car rolled the way a dryer rolls sheets with a sneaker caught among them, thump, tumble, thump. My body did its stern work, brace, curl, remember the lesson from the class I took after my first husband died, how not to die again. We landed. The airbag maced me with powder. I counted fingers and found the right number. I tasted iron and laughed, a small, cracked sound, because sometimes the body cannot tell the difference between terror and comedy. Eli was there before the official angels. He was all orders and apology. Ma'am, I'm going to look like I'm hurting you, but I promise it's theater. He slid me into a bag that smelled like plastic and hospitals. He zipped me up to my collarbone and left the smallest conspirator's crescent open. Over his shoulder I saw Owen's car blur past on the ridge, not stopping, not slowing, not knowing. Not knowing, or not wanting to know. The first siren arrived like a judge. The second, like a choir. Eli met them, stately with grief, and said, "She's gone," with a face so clean of expression it became a chapel. You think that was the trick? No. The trick is what comes after. The trick is keeping still while the world writes your ending without you. The trick is letting your son order the cheapest coffin and watching the men at the funeral home staple satin as though it had done something wrong. The trick is hearing the undertaker say, "Family discount," and deciding you will one day send him a bouquet of marigolds with a note that says, "Please keep the change." From the cabin 3 towns over, Petra and I watched the world pretend to lose me. The cameras we installed, our cameras, saw everyone's best and worst selves. My sister, Ruth, holding a measuring tape in my closet like she was putting away a holiday. The nephew, Cole, negotiating with Owen in the driveway, his hand on the hood of my Thunderbird as if checking a horse's flank. My friends at the cafe, the country club women, their grief a performance graded on volume and jewelry, their laughter snapping like brittle twigs when they thought no one could hear. Black Widow, one said, stirring her tea with diamonds. You know she sued 2 men. Spiders don't marry. They trap. Spendthrift, another said, which means a woman who spends money she earned without asking permission. Daniel won't marry her, the first crowed, or didn't. Maybe he's relieved. And then, with the elegance of a snake crossing a warm road, he looked handsome in that navy suit. I might pay my respects properly. At the next table sat an old woman with a pale bob wig and sunglasses too large for her face. She listened, sipped her watery decaf, and tried to keep her hands from shaking. I knew where the cameras had failed because I had taught them to. I knew where the microphones were hungry because I had fed them. I knew the smell of the garage and the smell of my son's lies. And in the quiet of that rented cabin, with the sea beating out a patience I had never had before, I began to write the list. Return what is mine. Return what is me. First, the truth, delivered not with a shout, but with a style they would never forget. Second, the law, because when blood betrays you, ink can still be loyal. Third, the spectacle, because people who worship appearances deserve a miracle in reverse. I sharpened my plan the way I once sharpened pencils for my second-grade classroom. I drafted entrances, exits, costume changes. Daniel would meet me at midnight behind the stables, where the stallions know secrets and keep them. Eli would lull the bureaucracy with the lullabies of forms. Petra would tug the right threads at the bank and the DMV and the courthouse until the fabric puckered into a shape we liked. But revenge, like grace, needs timing. On the 3rd day after my funeral, when the lilies had begun to sour and the condolence casseroles turned the fridge into a graveyard, Owen called Terence with a voice that tried to be a man's and landed on a boy's. We'll need to move quickly, he said. Mom would have wanted it that way. Terrence looked at the speakerphone like it could understand contempt. We will move legally, he answered. And with respect for your mother's expressed wishes. Owen paused. A calculator whirred in his skull. Sure. Of course. Respect. He cleared his throat. There's no need for, what did she call them? Ceremonial extravagances. She didn't like attention. I have never liked a lie told with my name in its mouth. That night, I took my list to the window and watched the lighthouse scissor the dark. Tomorrow, we would begin the taking back. Tomorrow, they would learn what it means when a woman decides to no longer be the softest thing in the room. And before any of that, I had one more place to go. The cemetery. The proof. The stone with my name cut into it like a bad joke. I would stand there, under the tree the groundskeeper loved, and I would ask myself a final question that only the dirt can answer. What, exactly, did I bury? And what, exactly, was about to rise? The cemetery smelled of damp earth and lilies that had been bought in bulk and then neglected, perfume diluted by rain and time. I stood where the temporary marker told the world I had been reduced to letters and dates, and for the first time since the stunt, I let myself tremble. Not from fear, from the delicious, almost childish thrill of being the author of my own resurrection. I had dressed for invisibility, a wig that hid more than hair, sunglasses wide enough to be a mask, a cardigan 3 sizes too large. I looked like a grandmother who had lost a knitting pattern and most of her patience. I sat on a bench and watched them come and go the way a cartographer watches a city for the first time, mapping the routes of hypocrisy. Owen showed up with the pallor of a man who had gone grocery shopping for grief and come back with cheap plastic flowers. He hugged his brother-in-law like a man buying loyalty by the hour. His tie was wrong, too bright, the color of a man who thinks optimism can be ironed. He spoke at the funeral about memory and stewardship and doing what's best for the family. His best meant speed to close accounts, speed to sign over authority, speed to make sure nothing lingered that might snag his neat little plan. Terrence, bless him, was a rock in a polyester suit. He moved with the slow, merciful intent of someone who knows how to bury secrets under reams of paperwork. He had called me 2 nights before my fake death and asked me, privately, legally, if I wanted 2 contingency documents in place. One would safeguard my assets if I died, the other would protect me if someone tried to move them hastily. They'll move fast, he had said. People do strange things at the scent of inheritance. You think they'll do anything illegal? I asked. He looked at me across his desk and smiled a smile that had learned to respect the inconvenient brilliance of old women. They will do what fear teaches them. But if you plan ahead, fear can be a problem your enemies solve for you. He had arranged for a bank freeze the moment a probate petition showed movement. He would not let Owen's gloved hands on every key. That freeze was Terrence's little miracle. The son leaned into speed, Terrence preferred the long game. Together we had the equivalent of 2 different chess clocks. My part was to provoke Owen into making a move, one that would expose himself. Terrence's part was to keep the chessboard honest. The coffee shop had become a theater of the absurd. My so-called friends met there in a ritual of condolence that would have been touching if their faces weren't polished and their laughter not so easy. They spoke of me like a rumor that had finally been given address. She always did like the dramatic, one said, arranging her scarf just so. I always wondered why she sued those men, said another, with the bland cruelty of a woman who measures life in scandal. I let the wig slip lower and sat at the next table. I watched them from behind the cheap sunglasses and noted the way their tongues sharpened into gossip when they thought the subject could not hear. I took in detail, who would try to seduce Daniel, who would eye the paintings, which of them would volunteer to take my Persian rug because it was too heavy for an elderly lady. Ruth, my sister, performed grief the way people perform vacations, with entitlement and suitcase-sized expectations. She came the morning after the funeral, not to mourn, but to inventory. You always had a taste for the dramatic, Cynthia, she told Terrence as though he could notarize her claim to my chandelier. Her hands measured the wardrobe with the greedy precision of someone choosing which rooms to strip. Cole, my nephew, who had always had the kind of smile that suggested he knew the price of things but not their worth, bought 3 of my retro cars from Owen for a pittance. He said with the delicate brutality of a man who thinks preservation is theft, "We'll restore them, Aunt Cyn. You wouldn't want them sitting around, would you?" He patted the hood of my Thunderbird the way men pat the heads of children they plan to use. I watched all of this with a curiosity that had longed to be a weapon. What surprised me was not their greed, that was expected, but how quickly affection can be repackaged into convenience. People like to say you can judge a person by who attends their funeral. I learned to judge them by what they used my absence to take. Petra's reports thickened like a stew. She had found evidence of shell companies, ledger tweaks, and a trail from Owen's accounts to a place in Las Vegas I will never visit, a building with velvet carpets and greed disguised as luck. Receipts matched with evenings he claimed he was on business. Phone logs placed him in the company of men who sold bad ideas for cash. I listened to the recordings Petra brought me with the detached fascination of a scientist. Owen's voice on one tape was liquid, promising, counting. "Once everything is transferred, we'll be out of the red," he said, fingers tapping a table I could picture. "By next quarter, the bank will be ours. Mom's accounts, no problem. She never kept things tidy." He said, casually, what I had feared, "We can push on the brakes we have to. Carmine says it'll look like an accident. No trace. No fuss." Carmine, Owen's mechanic friend, was the ghost in my garage. Petty theft is often family business, and I realized with a flush of shame that I had never learned to see a son's friendship list with suspicion. I had been too busy loving the shape of him when he was small and promising. Love is an expensive habit. When I told Terrence about the tape, he did not flinch. He smiled that dangerous smile lawyers have, the smile that tells you both good news and terrible news are on their way. "You've given me more than luck, Cynthia. You've given me a confession. We can use this. But we must be cunning. If we move too fast, they'll hide things. If we move too slow, they'll destroy evidence. We needed proof that would hold under the light of day." Petra arranged a meeting with a bank investigator. Terrence subpoenaed phone records. Eli, with his soft hands and steel nerves, arranged a staged delivery that would flush Owen into action. "He'll want the accounts," Eli said simply. "Make him show himself. Men who smell opportunity forget to lock their mouths." My role was theatrical, to be the bait. I would appear to have left a codicil, one that favored a charity and left Owen with much less than he expected. The lawyer on his side would leak it, Owen would react, and in his reaction the bank would find a transfer attempt, a forged signature, a hurried email asking for expedited access. The freeze would snap. The paper trail would shine like a severed tendon under a lamp. It was a delicious plan, the kind I once wrote in margins of physics homework and called daydreams. But there was a fragility to it I had to respect. People change when cornered. A trapped animal is not always rational. Evidence can be buried, phones wiped, friends bribed. I had counted on all of that and still smiled because I had one more card, one that I pulled only when the river ran dry. That evening, I risked a small theft of my own. I drove back to the house, my heart a bird banging against its cage. The gravel chewed my tires like an anxious mouth. I slipped in through the back gate, the lock still the same one I had installed years ago because a woman who once married for security tends to overdo the locks. Inside, the house smelled the way houses smell after a gathering, faint perfume, the tang of cheap coffee, a lingering note of someone else's cologne. Owen's. I crept past the rooms like a cat on a mission. I rifled the jewelry drawer, just long enough to touch the pearls I had worn to my second wedding, the chain that had been my mother's. I took the box I had thought I lost years ago, a small, battered tin with my initials. Inside the tin was a list I had written when I was 40, when the world felt both finite and forever. It was a list of the people I would trust in the event of a catastrophe. I had been naive enough to include Owen then. I had been wise enough to keep a second list, of things to do if any of them betrayed me. The second list had always felt like a fantasy. Tonight, it felt like a blueprint. I pocketed the tin and left as quietly as I had come. Outside, under the streetlight, I heard a muffled laugh from the house. Owen, on a call, speaking quickly, "We'll cremate. Quick and cheap. No fuss. It's cleaner that way. Less trouble." He sounded relieved, like men do when their teeth close on a plan. Cremation. The word landed with the heaviness of a guillotine. Cremation eliminates bones. It eliminates certain types of forensic evidence. It speeds finality. It removes the chance for a body to reappear and say, in a voice with a hint of triumph, "You forgot me." I drove back to the cabin with the tin in my bag and a new, tremulous energy. If Owen planned to cremate, our timeline tightened. Terrence and Petra needed to move sooner. Eli needed to be ready. Daniel needed to know. I realized, with a mix of dread and glee, that I had not only provoked their greed, I had forced them to reveal the speed at which they would betray me. The hits in this symphony were about to crescendo. I had already tasted the first notes. Now, I had to conduct. Tomorrow would be the hearing Terrence had set up to contest any immediate transfer of funds. Tomorrow I would watch from an empty pew as my son learned that law can be sharper than a nursery tale. Tomorrow the bank would freeze the accounts and the people who had planned to dance on my grave would find their chairs pushed back. But that night, alone with Daniel on the phone, I felt something else, the small, fierce joy of a woman who had chosen to live on her own terms. Daniel said, softly, "Are you sure about this, Cyn? Once we swing the hammer, there's no turning back." "I'm not sure," I said. "I'm certain. There's a difference. Certainty is a map. Unsure is the weather. I prefer maps." He laughed, and the sound carried like a promise. "Then I'll bring the shovel." I slept badly, and when I woke, my phone buzzed with a photograph that made my hands go cold. It was the cheap pine coffin Owen had ordered, unfinished wood, no lining, delivered that morning and already placed in the funeral parlor's garage. Someone had taken a picture and sent it to Terrence with a note. He wanted to move fast. I read the note twice. My pulse did the quick step. This was more than greed, it was ruthlessness. This was the man who would rather burn the proof than be judged by it. I called Petra. "They plan to cremate," I said. "Fast." Her reply was immediate, "Then we speed up. Meet me at the bank in 2 hours. Bring everything you have that proves ownership, titles, receipts, that stupid tin." I put the tin on the passenger seat and watched the road unspool. Behind the wheel, with the wig still tucked in my bag, I felt the old stimulant of speed, no longer the thrilling flirtation with danger but the necessary rush you feel when you must beat a clock set by someone else's greed. And as I drove toward the bank, a thought as bright as a blade cut through me: what if the next surprise will not be mine to give? What if someone else had already turned the page? The courthouse was beige and stale, the kind of place where justice tastes like paper and dust. I sat in the last pew of the gallery, disguised in my dowdy wig and glasses, while Terrence argued not just like a lawyer, but like a man who enjoyed breaking predators with nothing but his tongue and the law. Owen sat at the plaintiff's table, every inch the grieving son in his black suit. If I hadn't known better, I might have wept for him myself. He dabbed at his eyes with a folded tissue when the clerk glanced over, but as soon as attention drifted, he smirked at his phone. I knew that smirk. It was the same one he wore at 12 when he stole candy from the gas station and swore he'd found it on the ground. The judge, a woman with gray hair pulled into a bun tight enough to silence fools, cleared her throat. "Mr. Ruben, your petition requests immediate access to your late mother's accounts, citing funeral expenses and ongoing business liabilities. But there are discrepancies. The estate is under protective review. Until then, no transfers." I watched Owen's mask crack. His jaw clenched, his fingers tightened around the tissue until it shredded like confetti. He leaned toward his lawyer, hissing words that traveled even to the back row. "This wasn't the deal. You said it would be simple." Petra had been right. Pressure always makes the cracks sing. After the hearing, Owen stormed out into the corridor, his phone already glued to his ear. Petra shadowed him in her invisible way, slipping through the crowd with her recorder humming. Later that night, she played me the audio, Owen snapping, "I don't care what it costs. Mom's accounts were supposed to be mine. If the bank won't release them, then we'll find another way. Burn the paper trail if you have to." Burn. That word again. Cremation. Destruction. He wasn't just desperate, he was dangerous. Daniel came to the cabin that evening with a grocery bag of wine, bread, and a small bouquet of wildflowers he swore he hadn't stolen from the roadside. He set them on the counter like offerings to a goddess of wrath. "You should have seen his face," he said with a grin. He looked like a man watching his lottery ticket dissolve in the rain. I poured the wine and let myself laugh. It felt sharp, alive, like my ribs were unlocking. "He'll double down now," I said. "Men like Owen never retreat. They gamble again and again until they've lost the shirt off their back." "And when he does," Daniel replied, clinking his glass against mine, "we'll be waiting." But even as we toasted, a sliver of unease coiled inside me. Because gambling men don't just lose, they take down the table when the chips are gone. The next blow came from a direction I hadn't expected. Ruth, my dear sister, who had cried so prettily at the funeral, arrived at my house in broad daylight with a locksmith. Petra's hidden cameras caught it all. She waltzed in as if she owned the place, her hands greedy, her eyes shining. She tried on my jewelry, held my dresses against her frame, and even pocketed the little porcelain dog figurine I'd bought in Paris. The final insult? When she left, she was wearing my favorite necklace, an emerald drop Daniel had given me on our 3rd anniversary. The camera froze on her smug little smile as she locked the door behind her. I watched the footage in silence, the wine on my tongue turning bitter. "She's not just a vulture," I whispered. "She's a thief." Daniel's hand closed over mine. "Then take it back," he said simply. "You've already risen from the grave once. What's to stop you from haunting her doorstep?" I smiled at that, slow, dangerous. Because I could already see it, Ruth opening the door to find me standing there, flesh and blood, the ghost she thought she'd buried. And when she saw me wearing my own necklace, I would pluck the earrings from her ears and take them back one by one. But first, I had to deal with Owen. Because Petra's latest discovery made the hair on my arms rise, he was negotiating to sell the retro cars, my cars, the ones my husband's had gifted me, not just to Cole but to a private collector in another state. For pennies. For desperation. He wasn't just trying to strip me of money. He was erasing me, piece by piece. The cars weren't just machines, they were memories, milestones, love stories on wheels. Selling them was murder of a different kind. That night, I sat at the cabin's little desk and made a new list. Not just return what is mine. No. Now it read. 1. Take back the necklace from Ruth. 2. Retrieve the cars from Cole. 3. Expose Owen for fraud. 4. Ride into the country club on my stallion and watch their faces crumble. Because revenge, like wine, is best savored in courses. And tomorrow, the first course would be served. I had always imagined my first return from the dead would be grand, thunder rolling, candles flickering, Daniel at my side like some silver-haired knight. Instead, it was an afternoon under an ordinary sun, and I stood on the sidewalk outside my own home, staring at the curtains Ruth had pulled shut as if they already belonged to her. She answered the door in my emerald necklace and earrings, her hair perfectly set, her face smug with stolen confidence. For a heartbeat, she didn't recognize me. The disguise, the wig, the sunglasses, still shielded me. "Can I help you?" she said in that syrupy tone she reserved for delivery men. I pulled off the glasses. Slowly. Deliberately. Her face strained. The hand clutching the doorknob began to tremble. "CYN. Not dead enough for you, Ruth?" I stepped forward, closing the space between us. "I thought you'd be happy to see me." She stumbled back, stammering. But the funeral." Ah yes, I said, brushing past her into my own foyer. The funeral you decorated yourself with. I see you helped yourself to my jewelry box. How fitting. My corpse wasn't even cold before you played dress up. I reached for her ear and yanked the emerald earring free. She yelped. Then the other. Finally, I unclasped the necklace from her throat, ignoring her protests. These are mine, I said flatly. Always were. Always will be. Her hands fluttered uselessly. I thought, you were gone, I didn't mean. I laughed, low and sharp. You didn't mean? Ruth, you've been waiting your whole life for me to vanish so you could finally step into my clothes. But here I am. Alive. Breathing. And very, very done with you. She collapsed onto the settee, shaking. I left her there, clutching her pearls, my pearls, as it happened. When she looked up again, the only thing she saw was the door slamming behind me. I didn't have time to savor the victory. Petra was waiting with grim news. Owen had finalized the paperwork for the car sale. By tomorrow, 3 of my most prized possessions, the Thunderbird, the '67 Mustang, and the Cadillac convertible, would be on a trailer bound for Nevada. He's desperate, Petra said, sliding the documents across the table. And desperation makes him sloppy. The sale price is criminal. You could challenge it in court, but by then the cars will be long gone. I stared at the papers, my throat tight. Each of those cars was a love letter. One from my first husband, who said, "You deserve to be seen when you drive." One from the man who came after, who wanted to give me speed because he couldn't give me loyalty. And one from Daniel, who handed me the keys with the words, "Because you're the only woman I know who could handle both horsepower and heartbreak." They weren't cars. They were chapters. And Owen was tearing them out of my book. I'll take them back, I whispered. How? Petra asked. Not legally. Not politely. But directly. That evening, Daniel drove me to the lot where the cars were being kept before the transfer. A low chain-link fence, a sleepy guard shack, and 3 silhouettes gleaming under the sodium lights like ghosts of my past. Eli had arranged everything. The guard's shift would overlap with a delivery run. Paperwork had been misfiled. The security cameras, already ancient, were looped. All we had to do was walk in, sign a release, and drive away. It worked almost too easily. Within an hour, the Mustang roared down the back road with Daniel at the wheel, the Cadillac purred behind him, and I guided the Thunderbird like a queen reclaiming her throne. The wind through the open window carried not just speed, but vindication. By the time Owen realized the cars were missing, they would already be locked in storage under my name. Let him rage. Let him search. These weren't just vehicles. They were proof that the dead could still repossess their lives. But the real showstopper was yet to come. Petra insisted I keep hidden for a little longer, but I was already impatient. My friends at the country club, the ones who'd called me a black widow, a spendthrift, a joke, they met every Sunday to ride their glossy horses and gossip under the pretentious banner of ladies' tradition. I had a tradition of my own. My stallion, Archer, was waiting for me at Daniel's farm. Black as night, proud, and untamed by anyone but me. Are you sure about this? Daniel asked, brushing down Archer's mane. I swung into the saddle, grinning like a woman reborn. They wanted me gone. Instead, I'll ride back into their lives. The next morning, the women were halfway through their trot when the thunder of hooves announced me. Gasps rippled down the line as I galloped into their midst, my hair whipping, my emerald sparkling in the sun. Good morning, ladies. I called, pulling Archer to a perfect halt. Did you miss me? One friend, Marjorie, the one who had openly plotted to seduce Daniel, screamed, lost her balance, and tumbled off her horse into the dirt. Another, pale as milk, began to stutter, unable to form words. I patted Archer's neck, savoring the silence I had created. Don't look so frightened, I said sweetly. It isn't every day the dead return. Consider it divine justice. And with that, I turned Archer and rode away, leaving them to choke on their own whispers. That night, Daniel and I sat by the fire, laughter spilling between us like wine. But beneath my joy was steel. I had reclaimed my necklace. My cars. My pride. Now it was time for the final act. Owen thought he was clever, but I had his confession, his forged documents, his debts, his lies. Soon the police would have them too. Soon, my son would trade his tailored suits for prison orange. I had taken back the necklace, the cars, and the dignity my friends had tried to bury with me. But none of it meant anything if Owen was still free to circle like a vulture, waiting for the chance to swoop in and finish what he started. He was the root, and until I cut him out, he would keep growing back, greedier, sharper, more venomous. Petra was the one who finally said what I was already thinking. We sat in the cabin, late at night, papers spread across the table, forged emails, altered ledgers, casino receipts. Evidence that screamed, but softly enough that lawyers could still argue it away. "You want him behind bars," she said, tapping her nail against the pile. "Then you need something undeniable. Not just financial fraud. Something criminal that sticks. The brake tampering, for example. That's attempted murder. Catch him admitting it, and he'll never see daylight again." I thought of the way Owen had smiled at my funeral, how quickly he'd ordered the cheapest coffin, how his voice had cracked with irritation, not grief, when the bank froze my accounts. My son. My flesh and blood. And yet, he had planned my death with the same efficiency he used to schedule business deliveries. "I'll bait him," I whispered. "Make him think I'm still dead, but that someone close to me knows the truth. He'll go after them. He won't be able to help himself." Daniel, sitting across from me with his hand around his wine glass, leaned forward. "And who exactly do you plan to dangle in front of him like a worm on a hook? Because if you're thinking of yourself—" "Not myself," I interrupted. "You." His glass hit the table harder than I intended. "Cynthia, no." "Yes." My voice was firm. "He already suspects you." "They all do. My friends whispered that you only stayed with me for money. Owen has probably convinced himself of the same. If he thinks you've inherited something, or know something, you'll become his target. And when he comes for you, we'll have the proof." Daniel shook his head. "You're asking me to step into a bear trap." "I'm asking you," I corrected softly, "to help me close it." The next day, Petra and Eli set the stage. Petra drafted an anonymous email leaked to Owen, suggesting that Daniel had been added as a hidden beneficiary in my will. Eli borrowed recording equipment from his EMT buddies, tiny microphones smaller than a dime, cameras the size of shirt buttons. They planted them around Daniel's house, in the lamps, the picture frames, even the mailbox. "He'll come," Petra promised. "And when he does, he'll reveal himself." I waited in the cabin, the silence pressing on me like a coffin lid. Every second stretched like a rope pulled too tight. I paced. I poured tea I didn't drink. I stared at the burner phone Petra had given me, waiting for it to buzz with her signal. It came at 11:37 p.m. A single vibration. Then another. Showtime. Later, when I watched the footage, I saw my son as if for the first time, not as the boy who once brought me dandelions, but as the man greed had sculpted. He slipped into Daniel's kitchen like a thief who thought the dark made him invisible. His hair was messy, his tie askew. He reeked of desperation. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Owen snarled, his voice caught perfectly on Petra's microphone. "Mom's little boyfriend, with your farm and your horses. I know she changed the will. I know you're hiding it. Where is it?" Daniel, steady as stone, met his gaze. "You should lower your voice, Owen. If Cynthia were alive, she'd be ashamed of you." That one word, alive, made Owen snap. He slammed his fist on the counter, knocking over a glass. "Don't play games with me. I know what I did. I cut those brakes myself, and she still found a way to crawl out of it. If she's alive, if she's hiding, you tell me where she is. It was all there. Every word. Recorded. Preserved. Enough to put him away for 20 years. And I wasn't even in the room. When Petra delivered the files to Terence the next morning, he whistled low. "This isn't just evidence," he said. "It's a gift." He admitted everything. The forged emails, the money transfers, that was paper. But this? Attempted murder? It'll bury him. I should have felt triumph. Instead, I felt a dull ache, like a bruise where love had once lived. He was still my son. The boy I carried. The boy I'd held through fevers, who once begged me for another bedtime story. And now, the man who had tried to kill me. Daniel must have seen it in my face. He took my hand gently. "You can't save him, Cynthia. Not anymore. The best you can do is save yourself." I nodded, but my heart was a battlefield. Justice meant choosing myself over the boy I once rocked to sleep. And for the first time in my life, I chose me. That night, I returned to the cemetery with Daniel. We stood before the stone Owen had ordered, the one that reduced me to a name and 2 meaningless dates. I held the hammer in my hand, heavy as truth. I raised it once, twice, and then stopped. "No," I whispered. "Let it stay. Let this stone remind me of what I buried, the part of me that kept forgiving, excusing, waiting for love that never came." I dropped the hammer, letting it thud into the dirt. Then I turned to Daniel. "But the inscription will change." He frowned. "To what?" I smiled, and my voice was steady. "Cynthia Ruben. A woman who died for others, but was born for herself." The trial was still ahead. The handcuffs. The public spectacle. But for the first time in years, I felt alive, not hiding, not apologizing. Alive in a way only the dead can be when they claw their way back. And as I leaned against Daniel, the fire in my chest roared with one truth. This was only the beginning of my second life. The morning I chose to reveal myself, the air itself seemed to vibrate. It wasn't nerves, it was anticipation. Like a stage before the curtain rises. I had staged my death so well that now, my return had to be more than survival. It had to be spectacle. Petra begged me to do it quietly. "Cynthia, you have the recordings, the documents. The DA will file charges. Let the law handle it." But I had already lived through a funeral where no one mourned me, a wake where friends mocked me, a theft where my sister draped herself in my jewels. Silence wasn't enough. I wanted them to see me. To choke on their disbelief. To understand that the woman they tried to bury had not only survived but triumphed. Daniel didn't argue. He just saddled Archer, brushed down the stallion until his coat shone like obsidian, and kissed my hand. "If you're going to rise from the dead, CYN, he said with a grin, then ride in like a queen." The Sunday gathering at the country club was its usual theater of vanity, pastel hats, prancing horses, laughter too sharp to be sincere. Marjorie, oh, Marjorie, sat tall on her mare, her eyes scanning for Daniel as if he were a prize to be claimed now that I was safely in the ground. Then the thunder of hooves broke across the lawn. Every head turned as Archer and I galloped in, the emeralds glittering at my throat, my hair uncovered at last. I pulled him to a halt in the center of the ring, letting the silence stretch. "Good afternoon, ladies," I called, my voice carrying clear as a bell. "Did you miss me?" The world froze. One woman shrieked and nearly toppled from her saddle. Marjorie went pale, her lips forming my name like a curse. Another friend began to stutter so badly she couldn't manage a single word. I laughed, not cruelly, but richly, with all the freedom of a woman who had nothing left to fear. "I see you've been busy rewriting my life story while I was gone. Spendthrift. Black widow. Poor Cynthia, too foolish to keep a man." Well, I leaned down, stroking Archer's neck. "You'll be pleased to know I'm preparing for my 4th wedding. Daniel sends his love." gasps rippled through the circle. One rider, in her shock, slid right off her horse into the dirt. The others stared at me as if I had galloped straight out of the grave. "Consider this your reminder," I said softly, "that ghosts hear everything." Then I turned Archer and rode away, leaving them speechless in the dust. The real stage came 3 days later at the courthouse. The DA had moved quickly once Petra handed over Owen's taped confession. The hearing was public. The room was packed, reporters, gawkers, even a few of those same country club women who couldn't resist the scent of scandal. Owen sat at the defendant's table, pale but still trying to smirk, still believing he could talk his way out of anything. His lawyer leaned over, whispering frantically, but Owen's arrogance had always been louder than reason. Then the bailiff called the surprise witness. The doors at the back opened. And I walked in. Gasps shook the room like a wave. Someone actually screamed. The reporters surged forward, cameras flashing like lightning. Owen's face, oh, I will never forget it, went white, then red, then slack with terror. He half rose from his chair, pointing at me as if I were a phantom. "No," he choked. "No, this isn't possible. She's dead. I buried her." I stopped in front of him, close enough that he could see the emeralds gleaming at my throat. "You buried an empty coffin," I said, my voice steady. "And in it, you buried the last of my illusions about you." The judge banged her gavel for order, but I had already done what I came to do. My son had unmasked himself in front of everyone, not just as a fraud, but as a would-be murderer. That night, after the courthouse emptied and the reporters camped outside my gate like vultures, Daniel and I walked to the cemetery. We stood before the stone that bore my name. I traced the carved letters with my fingertip and felt no grief, only release. "Shall we smash it now?" Daniel asked, holding the hammer. I shook my head. "No. Let it stand. But I'll change the words." The sculptor came a week later. He carved the new inscription exactly as I dictated. Cynthia Ruben. A woman who died for others, but was born for herself. I stood back, reading it, and felt something settle in me like a crown. I had been daughter, wife, mother, widow. I had been betrayed, mocked, nearly murdered. But now, I was something else entirely, reborn, untouchable, free. The dead had no power. But I, the resurrected, had everything. The courthouse spectacle was over, but its echo rolled through town like thunder. Everywhere I went, I saw whispers in people's eyes. At the grocer's, they craned their necks to glimpse me. At the cafe, conversations faltered when I entered, cups rattling in saucers as women remembered the things they'd once said when they thought I was gone. Some looked away in shame. Others smiled too quickly, desperate to realign themselves with the woman they had buried too soon. I didn't bother to acknowledge them. I had wasted too many years caring about people who only loved me in convenience. Now, I was choosing my circle. And it was small. Daniel, of course, my anchor. Petra, with her sharp mind and loyal silence. Eli, whose young hands had zipped me into a body bag and into my new life. And Terence, who had guarded my fortune as though it were his own. 4 people. That was all. The rest could gossip themselves hoarse. Owen, meanwhile, was shackled by the justice system he thought he could outwit. His arraignment was a circus, cameras flashing as reporters shouted questions about attempted murder, fraud, and betrayal. I didn't attend, I'd already had my performance, but Petra went, and she told me everything. "He's trying to paint himself as desperate, not criminal," she reported, sipping her bitter coffee. "Says the casino debt clouded his judgment. Says he never meant to harm you, just wanted, what's the word? Closure." "Closure," I repeated, tasting the poison of it. "By cutting my brakes?" Petra shrugged. "Men like Owen never call it what it is. But don't worry. The DA has your tape, the financial records, even Carmine ready to testify about the brake job. He's cornered." For the first time in months, I slept deeply, my body sinking into the mattress without dreams. Justice had begun its slow crawl, and I didn't have to chase it anymore. With Owen contained, I turned to something I hadn't dared before, my own future. Not survival. Not revenge. Life. Daniel asked me one evening as we sat on his porch, watching Archer graze in the pasture. The sun sank like molten copper, painting his silver hair with fire. He held out a small velvet box, and when I looked inside, I saw a ring that wasn't ostentatious or expensive, but perfect, a band of gold with 3 small emeralds that caught the light like tiny flames. "I know you've worn rings before," he said softly. "I know they didn't always mean what they should have. But this one is for the woman you've become. Not the widow. Not the mother. Just Cynthia." For the first time in my life, I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said. And my voice shook, not from fear, but from joy so strong it cracked me open. Of course, news of my 4th engagement spread like wildfire. The very same women who had sneered at me in the cafe now fluttered around, asking questions about the dress, the ceremony, the guest list. I let them chatter. I owed them nothing. But I planned one surprise. The week before the wedding, I returned to the country club. This time, I didn't gallop in like a ghost on a stallion. I walked through the front doors in a silk dress the color of midnight, emeralds glittering at my ears, Daniel at my side. Heads turned. Forks frozen midair. Marjorie, poor Marjorie, couldn't meet my gaze. She had been bold enough to whisper about stealing my fiancé when she thought I was buried, but now she quivered in her seat. I leaned close to her as I passed and whispered, "Careful what you wish for. Sometimes the dead really do rise." She blanched so badly she nearly slid out of her chair. At the cemetery, the new inscription was finished. I took Daniel there before the wedding. The stone gleamed under the morning light, the words carved sharp and true. Cynthia Ruben. A woman who died for others, but was born for herself. I stood there, reading it aloud, and felt tears burn my eyes, not sorrow, but release. "That woman is gone," I said. "The one who bent, who forgave, who stayed silent. I buried her. What walks beside you now, Daniel, is someone else. Someone alive." He kissed my hand, his eyes shining. "Then I am the luckiest man alive too." The invitations went out. The preparations began. But for me, the wedding wasn't just about vows and flowers. It was a declaration, a rebirth dressed in silk and music. Because when I walked down that aisle, everyone who had written me off, stolen from me, mocked me, or betrayed me would see it. Cynthia Ruben, resurrected, radiant, untouchable. And Owen? He would watch the photos from a prison cell. The morning of my wedding dawned with the kind of sky poets dream of, clear, wide, and blue enough to make even cynics believe in blessings. The estate where Daniel and I had chosen to wed hummed with quiet preparation, florists arranging emerald green ribbons, the caterers laying white linen over long tables, the musicians tuning their strings beneath the oak trees. For once, I wasn't thinking of revenge. I was thinking of silk brushing my skin, of Daniel's hand steady in mine, of walking forward not as someone's widow, not as Owen's mother, not as a woman clawing her way back from the grave, but simply as Cynthia. Petra and Eli arrived early. Petra, in a dark suit and sunglasses, looked less like a guest and more like a bodyguard. She had insisted on helping oversee security, old habits, she said, but I knew it was because she didn't trust that Owen's story was over, even if he was sitting in a county jail awaiting trial. Eli, meanwhile, fussed over the seating chart with the enthusiasm of a grandson planning a secret surprise for his grandmother. "You're radiant," Daniel whispered to me when I finally emerged in my dress, a gown of deep cream with embroidered emerald leaves twining across the bodice. His eyes glistened, and for a moment, the world was only the two of us. Then the first guest screamed. It came from the edge of the lawn, where a cluster of chairs had been set for the less important relatives. The scream was followed by a sharp crack, like wood splitting. People surged to their feet, gasping, pointing. At first, I thought it was an accident, a chair breaking, a guest fainting in the sun. But then I saw it, a figure stumbling into the clearing, clothes disheveled, face pale, wrists still bearing the raw marks of iron cuffs. Owen. My son. The crowd erupted. Women clutched their pearls, men cursed under their breath. Someone shouted for the police. Petra was already moving, her hand sliding to the small revolver she kept hidden in her jacket. But Owen lifted his arms, palms outward, his eyes fixed only on me. Mother, he rasped. Don't let them take me. Time fractured. Part of me was the bride, horrified that my day had been stained. Part of me was the ghost who had already risen once, now forced to rise again. And part of me was the mother who, despite everything, still recognized the boy in those broken eyes. You tried to kill me, I said, my voice cold enough to still the crowd. You cut my brakes. You forged my name. You sold my memories. And now you stand here, begging me for mercy? His lip trembled. I was desperate. The debts, the lies, I didn't know how to stop. But when they locked me up, I realized, you're all I had left. Please. If you still love me, save me. Gasps rippled through the guests. Cameras clicked, reporters had slipped into the ceremony, hungry for drama. Every eye waited for me to answer. Daniel stepped closer, his voice low and firm. Don't listen, Cynthia. He's playing you. Just like he's always played you. Petra added, the DA's man will be here in minutes. Let him hang on his own words. But Owen's gaze locked onto mine, burning, pleading. And for a heartbeat, I saw him as he once was, a boy holding my hand on the first day of school, a teenager laughing when I let him drive the Mustang for the first time, a man who should have been my protector instead of my enemy. My heart clenched. But then I remembered the funeral, the cheap coffin, the whispers, the betrayal that ran deeper than blood. Love without respect is a chain, and I had broken mine. I lifted my chin. I buried you once, Owen. This time I won't come back. The sheriff's deputies arrived then, charging across the lawn. Owen tried to lunge forward, but Petra stepped between us, her eyes like knives. He was dragged away, shouting my name, cursing me, promising vengeance. The ceremony had shattered into chaos, but the silence that followed was mine to claim. I walked to the altar anyway, my gown trailing across the grass, my emeralds glinting in the unforgiving sun. Daniel met me there, steady as ever, and took my hand. Are you sure? He whispered. I nodded. More than ever. Today isn't about him. It's about us. The minister cleared his throat, voice trembling as he resumed. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today. As the vows passed my lips, I felt the weight of the past lift. My son had chosen greed over love, betrayal over loyalty. But I had chosen myself. I had chosen life. I had chosen Daniel. And when he slipped the ring onto my finger, the applause rose like a tide, washing away the last of my doubt. That night, beneath the lantern strung across the garden, I danced barefoot with Daniel, laughter spilling out of me like I'd never known sorrow. My friends, the real ones, clapped along. Petra even smiled. Eli filmed it on his phone, already planning to send me the video as a keepsake. At the edge of the garden, the sculptor who had carved my stone raised his glass to me. I raised mine back, knowing exactly what my epitaph should have been, what it now truly meant. A woman who died for others, but was born for herself. And this time I knew, she would never be buried again. The wedding glow lingered in me like a second heartbeat. For weeks afterward, I would catch myself humming while I brewed coffee, or smiling at strangers in the street. Daniel and I returned from a short honeymoon on the coast, salt in our hair, laughter still echoing, and for the first time in years, I felt not hunted, not betrayed, but free. But freedom has a strange flavor when you've once staged your own death. It is sweet, yes, but laced with caution. Every time the phone rang, I wondered if it was the DA calling about Owen's trial. Every time a car slowed in front of the house, I thought of Carmine, or one of the men Owen had owed money to. Shadows didn't vanish just because I'd chosen to step into the light. The town had shifted. People who once mocked me now crossed the street to greet me, pressing my hands, smiling too wide, pretending they had always been loyal. "Cynthia, darling, we knew you had such spirit," they'd say, as if gossip could be rewritten like a newspaper headline. I let them talk. Let them play at friendship. They were background noise now, not anchors. But not everyone adjusted so easily. Ruth, my dear sister, avoided me entirely. After the day I plucked my necklace from her throat, she vanished into her house and drew the blinds. I heard from Petra that she had tried to sell one of my paintings, only to be laughed out of the auction when the appraiser proved it was stolen. Justice, in its own quiet way, had found her too. Cole, my nephew, tried to slink back into my good graces, whining about how Owen had tricked him, how the car sales weren't his fault. I didn't even let him inside the gate. "When you touch what isn't yours," I told him through the intercom, "it burns. Remember that." He hasn't returned since. But the trial, that was the true storm on the horizon. Petra delivered updates like dispatches from a battlefield. Owen's lawyer tried everything, claiming duress, painting me as unstable, even suggesting I had faked my death with his help to manipulate the family. But the recordings didn't lie. His words, "I cut those breaks myself," rang in the courtroom like a church bell. The DA wanted me to testify in person. "The jury needs to see you," he said. Alive. Strong. The mother he betrayed. The thought made me tremble. I had already shocked the town once with my reappearance, but to sit in that box and stare at my son, my child, and condemn him with my voice? That was something else entirely. Daniel held me in the night when I confessed my fear. "You don't owe him your silence anymore, Cyn," he whispered. "You owe yourself your truth." And I knew he was right. In the meantime, I began to build a second life out of the ashes of the first. Daniel and I moved into a new house on the bluff, overlooking the sea. I sold the old estate, every room echoing with memories too sharp to polish. The money went to a foundation in my name, a fund for women starting over after betrayal, loss, or violence. "If I can rise from the grave," I said at the launch event, "then so can they." The applause washed over me like a baptism. But it wasn't just philanthropy. I took Archer out riding every morning, galloping along the cliffs until the wind stung my cheeks and my heart raced with joy. I hosted dinners with people who had proven themselves worthy: Petra, Eli, Terrence, a few neighbors who offered kindness instead of curiosity. I laughed often. I slept deeply. And yet, every so often, when the waves crashed against the rocks, I would hear Owen's voice again: "Mother, don't let them take me." The day of the trial came faster than I expected. I dressed not in mourning black but in emerald green, the same color as my reclaimed jewels, the same color as rebirth. Daniel kissed my forehead before I left. "Whatever happens in that courtroom, remember, you've already won." I walked into the courthouse flanked by Petra and Terrence, reporters shouting my name, cameras flashing like fireworks. And when I entered the courtroom, Owen looked up, his eyes hollow, his body thinner, his arrogance cracked. He wasn't the boy I had raised. He wasn't even the man who had betrayed me. He was a stranger, a ghost of greed and ruin. And for the first time I felt not sorrow. Not rage. But finality. Because I knew, when I took the stand, that my words would be the last shovel of earth on the grave of the son I had once loved. The courtroom was thick with silence, the kind that prickles on your skin. The judge called my name, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. All eyes turned as I rose from the bench, emerald dress sweeping the floor like a tide. Reporters leaned forward. Jurors shifted in their seats. Owen wouldn't look at me, he stared at the table, jaw tight, fingers tapping out a rhythm of denial. I walked to the witness stand, every step a declaration: I had been buried, but I refused to stay dead. When I raised my hand to swear the oath, I thought of the tombstone with my name carved in stone. This was my second epitaph, spoken in living breath. The DA began gently, his tone respectful. "Mrs. Ruben, could you tell the court, in your own words, why you are here today?" I inhaled. The words came steady, sharper than any blade. I am here because my son tried to kill me. He cut my brakes. He forged my name. He wanted my money more than he wanted my life. And when I survived, he buried an empty coffin and celebrated my death. Gasps rippled through the room. Owen's head jerked up, his eyes blazing, his mouth already forming excuses. But the DA raised a hand, silencing him. Mrs. Ruben, how do you know this? I glanced at Petra, then back at the jury. Because he said it himself. On tape. In my fiancé's kitchen. He admitted it. I've heard the words. You will too. The DA pressed a button, and the recording filled the room. Owen's voice, frantic, furious, I cut those brakes myself, and she still found a way to crawl out of it. It was like a hammer strike. Jurors flinched. Reporters scribbled like their pens were on fire. Owen's lawyer buried his face in his hands. And Owen, my son, my boy, he stood, his voice cracking, shouting, she's lying. She's always lied. She staged all of this to destroy me. The judge slammed the gavel. Order. But the damage was done. His outburst was desperation laid bare. The jurors saw it. They weren't looking at me anymore, they were staring at him. At the man who had admitted too much, who had tried too hard, who had finally dug his own grave. When my testimony ended, I stepped down from the stand with Daniel's words echoing in me, you've already won. For the first time, I believed it. The trial dragged on for days, but the momentum never shifted. The DA built his case brick by brick, fraud, embezzlement, gambling debts, and finally, attempted murder. Terrence testified about the forged emails. Petra testified about the financial trail. Eli testified about the night of the crash, about zipping me into that body bag. Every piece fit. Every lie Owen had told came unraveled. And I sat there, emerald dress bright as a banner, not as a victim but as a witness to my own resurrection. The verdict came after only 3 hours of deliberation. Guilty on all counts. Attempted murder. Fraud. Forgery. Embezzlement. The judge's voice was calm, but each word was a stone placed over the grave of Owen's freedom, 25 years without parole. My son collapsed into his chair, face pale, hands trembling. For the first time, he looked not angry, not arrogant, but small. A boy lost in the ruins of his own greed. For a heartbeat, my heart ached. But then I remembered the funeral, the cheap coffin, the laughter of so-called friends, the sound of my son's voice bargaining away my life for chips at a casino. I stood, gathered my things, and walked out without looking back. Outside the courthouse, the camera swarmed, microphones thrust at me like weapons. Mrs. Ruben, how does it feel to see your son convicted? Do you feel justice has been served? What will you do now? I paused, my emeralds catching the sun, my voice carrying steady across the chaos. My son chose greed over love. Betrayal over loyalty. Today, the law chose justice. As for me, I have chosen life. And that is something no one will ever take from me again. Flashbulbs popped. Reporters shouted. But I turned away, Daniel at my side, the sea air rushing in as if the world itself had been waiting for me to claim it. That night, back at our house on the bluff, I lit a fire and sat with Daniel, Petra, and Eli. Wine in our glasses, laughter on our lips. Owen was gone to the prison system, Ruth to her silence, my friends to their shame. And me? I was alive. Truly alive. The woman who had staged her death had not only returned, she had been reborn. The trial was over. The headlines faded. Owen's name, once tied to mine like a curse, was now bound to words like convicted and prison sentence. For weeks, I would wake at dawn expecting dread, only to find none waiting for me. The silence in my chest was strange, but welcome. Now came the question I had been putting off, what do I do with the rest of my life? The first answer came when I returned to the cemetery one last time. The inscription glowed in the morning light. Cynthia Ruben. A woman who died for others, but was born for herself. I stood before it, not with grief, but with gratitude. That stone marked the end of one life and the beginning of another. The first Cynthia had been dutiful, daughter, wife, mother, widow. The second Cynthia had faked her death, fought for her survival, and risen again. But now I wanted to be more than a survivor. I wanted to leave something behind, not for Owen, not for Ruth, not for the women who whispered, but for myself. I traced the letters with my hand and whispered, "You are free now." And for the first time I truly believed it. Daniel was the one who planted the seed. We sat on the porch, the ocean restless below, glasses of wine in hand. "You know," he said, watching the horizon, "you could vanish. We could sell everything, buy a boat, and spend our years drifting. No one would find us. No one would expect anything." The thought was tempting. To vanish on my terms. But I shook my head. I've been invisible long enough. I don't want to disappear anymore. I want to be seen, really seen. So instead of vanishing, I built. With Terrence's help, I established the Phoenix Fund. A foundation for women betrayed by family, cheated out of their inheritances, silenced by abusers, or left behind after being told they were too old to start over. My story became the spark. Reporters who had once chased scandal now ran profiles titled, "The Widow Who Rose from Her Grave to Save Others." The donations came faster than I expected. And not just money, letters, too. From women who said, "My sister stole my jewelry." From women who confessed, "My own son tricked me into signing papers." From women who whispered, "I thought I was crazy until I heard your story." Each letter was a mirror. Each one reminded me I was not alone. And if I could rise, so could they. Petra became the fund's chief investigator, tracking down con men and liars. Eli offered his time at the clinic for women who needed medical care. Terrence handled the legal work, pro bono. And Daniel, dear Daniel, opened his home for the first retreat, where 5 women sat around our kitchen table, drinking coffee and telling stories they'd never dared to speak before. I looked at them and thought, this is my real legacy. Not the cars. Not the jewelry. Not even the money. But this. And yet, beneath the joy of building, shadow still lingered. Owen was alive, somewhere behind prison walls. I told myself he couldn't touch me anymore, but in quiet moments I could hear his voice, "Mother, don't let them take me." At night, I would dream of him, not as the man in handcuffs, but as the boy with dandelions in his fist, the boy who once whispered, "Don't worry, Mom, I'll always protect you." It was the cruelest part of betrayal, that memory itself became weaponized. Daniel found me one dawn, standing barefoot on the porch, tears hot on my face. He wrapped his arms around me and whispered, "You don't have to forgive him, CYN. You just have to let him go." And I realized that was the final act of my resurrection. Not vengeance. Not even justice. But release. So I wrote Owen a letter. Not to send, just to burn. "My son, I loved you. I carried you. I believed in you. And you chose greed over love. You tried to end me, but you only ended yourself. I will not follow you into that darkness. I choose light. I choose life. Goodbye." I lit a match, and as the paper curled to ash, I felt something loosen inside me. A chain snapping. I was free. And now, with freedom, came the chance to dream again. Daniel and I began to plan a journey, not to escape, but to celebrate. A trip through Europe, the places I'd once promised myself I'd see someday. Paris, Florence, Vienna. Someday had finally arrived. The dead don't get second chances. But I wasn't dead anymore. I was reborn. Europe smelled like freedom. Paris was first, butter melting on croissants, violins echoing in the metro tunnels, lovers kissing by the Seine as if no one could see them. Daniel and I walked hand in hand through Montmartre, and for the first time in years, I did not feel like someone's mother, someone's widow, someone's prey. I was simply a woman, alive, and the world was finally wide enough for me. From there we traveled to Florence. The Duomo rose above us like a heart carved in stone, and I whispered to Daniel, if I had died, I would have never seen this. He kissed my hair and answered, you did die. But you came back. In Vienna, we listened to Mozart under chandeliers that glittered like the stars over my childhood home, and I thought of the girl I had once been, the one who dreamed, but was told to stay small. I was no longer small. The Phoenix Fund grew in my absence. Petra sent me reports of women it had helped, a grandmother who reclaimed her home from a manipulative grandson, a widow who exposed a fraudulent caretaker, a daughter who finally cut ties with a cruel sister. Each story was a mirror, but also a lantern. My pain had become someone else's map. I carried those letters with me, tucked into my travel bag alongside postcards and ticket stubs. They reminded me that my resurrection was not just mine, it was shared. And yet, even as I stood beneath cathedrals and rode trains through green valleys, a part of me still whispered of Owen. He remained in prison, serving his sentence. I would never visit him. But sometimes, in dreams, he was still a boy holding dandelions, still a man trying to bargain with fate. I no longer hated him. I no longer loved him either. I had released him into the silence of history, where he belonged. Forgiveness was not mine to give. But freedom was mine to keep. On our final night abroad, Daniel and I stood on a balcony in Lisbon. The sea spread out black and endless, the stars spilling their cold fire across the sky. He handed me a glass of wine and said, so, Mrs. Ruben, tell me, what will you do with your second life? I thought of the tombstone at home, the one that bore my name and my rebirth. I thought of the women writing letters to the fund. I thought of Archer waiting in his stable, of emerald sparkling in sunlight, of Daniel's steady hand in mine. And I answered simply, I will live. Fiercely. Shamelessly. Fully. Because I am not the woman they buried. I am the woman who rose. The next morning, as the plane carried us home, I pressed my forehead to the window and watched the ocean below. It stretched forever, vast and unknowable, like the years still waiting for me. I smiled. Cynthia Ruben had died once, it was true. But what mattered wasn't the death. It was the return. And this time, this life, there would be no burial, no coffin, no silence. Only the fierce heartbeat of a woman born for herself.